So, hi. This feels excessively formal for all of for all of us, but they're doing a YouTube thing, so I guess I have to use the mic and so forth. But anyhow, um, you know, I've I've been coming to Beyond Baroque. So the first thing I want to say is a huge thank you to Beyond Baroque. I have been coming here for 50 years. 50 years because I used to come here on Friday nights, um, to their poetry readings, and so this was a big part. And now I can't see anybody. Is that how it's supposed to be? I want to be able to see you. Can you turn some lights on? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyhow, so a huge thank you to Beyond Baroque. This was absolutely just a big part of my poetry. I cut my teeth here, my poetry teeth here. And the other thing, thank you to all of you. I've read here, like, it seems like every time a new book, I come to Beyond Baroque, but it's changed so much. Beyond Baroque hasn't changed, or maybe it has, but early on, like my parents and their whole generation of friends would come, and that generation is now gone. So you are all representing my LA life, and I'm really appreciative that you're all here. Very appreciative. Oh, and the other thing is that some people I haven't seen, one person I haven't seen since elementary school is here. And that's the Facebook thing. And then other people from the way back. So I'm really, yeah, it's lovely to be in the community. Is it possible to get a little bit more light? Or does that not work? Yeah, because I'd like to be able to see people. A little bit more. That's good. Okay. So anyhow, so my book came out in August, and I'm going to read some poems from it, and then hopefully people will stay and eat and drink some more and so forth. So I realized when I was putting together the poems for this reading that I have a lot of poems that I write from a middle distance. And I know we've all experienced that middle distance where, you look at a stranger or you look at an acquaintance, somebody you've never spoken to, but your mind gets very busy imagining who they are. And then you sort of imagine yourself in that context. So I realized that I have a lot of poems that I write from that place. So I thought I would start with a couple of those, 3 of those. And the first one, when I first moved to, many of you probably know that, or some of you probably know that after being in the Bay Area for 40 years, Jeff and I have moved to Paso Robles, to the Central Coast. But when I first moved to San Francisco, it was actually the East Bay when I first moved, the AIDS crisis was really in full force. Or this was the 80s, so very soon thereafter it was in full force. And I volunteered to be I guess, I don't know what they called it, a companion, a listener. So this first poem is about the training to become a volunteer. It's called Assertion. Once I washed a stranger's face and stared into his eyes. We were learning how to sit with the dying, the plague years, young men walking with canes in our city, skeletal, bruised. The opposite of assertion, to be seen unarranged. I will stare into your catastrophe and let you stare into mine. He worked for the opera, the stranger before me. Your face without makeup, he said. How beautiful. That's what seemed to surprise him. And continuing on that theme, the decade before that, in the 70s, when I started college, was when the Vietnam vets were returning and being integrated, trying to be reintegrated back into society. And so this takes place, in a college setting with that. It's called State U. One classmate, old, 30 or 27, had been to war. The war was over. Intermission between this war and the next. The teacher asked him for his sources, but he didn't know there were stairs, that the library started on the 2nd floor. He'd wandered the lobby level, couldn't understand where the books were. What a thing to admit. Now he is starting to cry, the war still ringing in his ears and exploding behind his eyes. Soldier, though I do not know if you are still alive, let me say that I honor the wet flag of your shame spread before us, flag you did not want to spread but could not hide. Without permission, I have used you many times to stand closer to myself, Should I thank you for this? Um, Sometimes we're not alone when we see the stranger or strangers. So, in this case, my husband and I are together, and we see these strangers, and it's that thing of we see the same thing, but we don't see the same thing. So, this poem I actually was one of the poems I put on Facebook a while ago, and it generated some controversy, which I think is just the nature of what we see reflected back when we look at things we don't know. It's called Women with Men. Walking one evening with my husband in the park, we hear a man moaning from the bathroom, a girl on her knees clutching the toilet, the guy fucking her from behind. Should we call the police? Or yell to see if she needs help? According to my husband, they're just kids, too drunk to care about the public setting of their sex. True, we didn't see her struggle. Do nothing. Keep walking. The cinder blocks darkening behind us. A dozen years ago, but I think of her sometimes. Girl on her knees, now nearing 30. Does she remember that night? Or is it lost in a blur of bad or semi-bad or only messy attempts at love? Maybe she was dragged from the path, and what looked like lack of struggle was betrayal. Her voice on mute, and her body, what could she do but abandon it? My own voice, buried like a small animal under a tree, another animal digs up and devours. You can react. You don't have to be completely silent. Oh, I don't know about that. Oh, we'll see about that one. This next poem shifts gears a little bit. Maybe it's almost like an antidote to the previous poem. I read somewhere that somebody did a survey of. They asked a bunch of women, "What would you if you had if you could choose your superpower? Would you rather be invisible or be able to fly?" And so this is the answer to that. It's called superpower. Turns out most women want to disappear. Forget flying, mythic, heroic, swooping down to save the weak from the cruel. We'd rather be invisible, get away with shoplifting, watching sex, walking all night, slipping the leash of safety, its endless warnings against. What we want is to stop having skin, fabric fed from a spool and spread across a table to be stamped with pattern. We prefer to be air, the one thing no one can claim and no one can live without. I think I must get most of my knowledge either from YouTube or, maybe Psychology Today, because this next poem also is a poem that, this idea that I read somewhere that as we get older, most of what we regret from the past is what we didn't do, not what we did do. So this poem speaks to that. It's called Beggar. What a waste when I was young, not loving, but obsessing over imaginary, unavailable. Not for me the prelude of hands brushing against each other, passing sugar. Nor chapter 1, the unbuttoning, shirts like spilled cream on the worn floor. Chapters 2 through 5, a fight, a change of scenery, a feast. The cleanup left for morning as the lovers retreat to the nest at the top of the stairs, the summer they live in the old sea house. Roommates fail to see the charm of lobster shells and half-eaten chocolates, soiled napkins like wilted peonies, and the faint sound of laughter leaking through the ceiling. Not mine, the final chapter, where the hero bicycles through the winter landscape, ash and bone, bare trees, a lone figure on a path through the woods. My heart was a tin cup, rattling its single coin like a beggar on the corner as the lovers passed. One's hand tucked in the other's back pocket, the whole sky laying down for them its silver. Here's a short poem about flavor. It's called Bitter. Children like sweet and salt. The adult mouth craves the peculiar pleasure of olives, quinine, espresso with a peel of lemon, a Manhattan or old-fashioned, dash of bitters, cardamom, coriander, momentary sting that warms. Bitter melon, bitter chocolate. The imagination as well acquires a taste for pepper added to cake, horseradish to cream, grudges like copper pots gleaming on the range. And of course, because I'm in LA, I had to read an LA poem. I've been, dancing around my hometown ever since I left at 17. So, and what I've been doing for the last several years is renting Airbnbs in different parts of town, which I've really enjoyed because the city is so spread out. In a different part of town, you almost feel like, you're in a whole different city. So, I've been having fun with that for a long time. So this poem is called "I'm Gorgeous Inside." I can afford to live in Laurel Canyon for a week. Rented studio, can pretend I'm a regular, know by name the old guys whiling away the morning with their coffees. This could be Peoria, Dubuque, only they're boho rich and maybe famous from the canyon's glory days of rock and roll. Back up the hill with my latte, I'm gorgeous inside, affixed to the for sale sign on a yellow house. Pretty enough, but not drop dead for the 3 or is it 5 million asking. I want to come home to die, I half joke over drinks with my friends. Hometown I left at 17 against the brutality of beauty. This time I really mean it. Come home at last, and let the waning years of my gorgeous commence. I don't know, that was how many years ago? Laurel Canyon, and I have not moved back, but I'm getting closer. I've moved to the Central Coast. So there you go. Here's another sort of topical poem. For those of you who observe Shana Tova, Rosh Hashanah just was, the Yom Kippur is on its way, so we're in the middle of the High Holy Days. And I'm definitely not religious. I don't really like the expression once a year Jew because I feel, completely haunted and permeated and all that with being Jewish all the time. But I am probably a once or maybe twice a year temple goer. Though I belong to this sort of, I don't know, yeah, it's complicated. I imagine for a lot of you it's complicated, but I don't go to temple very often. But when I go, I try to get a poem out of it. It's called The Door of Mercy. A woman leaps from her seat and bounds into the aisle, swaying and clapping her hands over her head to the Sephardic renditions, oud and mandolin of the melodies we grew up with, her face shiny with joy. Not young or lithe, like girls at concerts who stand on their seats to dance, shirts lifted to show the flat stones of their stomachs. The woman in the aisle is wearing a houndstooth dress, a little tight through the middle, each tooth the size of a fist. My own fountain of joy is not spilling over, as evidenced by my writing this dark note on the back of the insert in the prayer book, my hand the only moving part of me. What would it take to give myself over to the holy? I am bent not in prayer, but judgment, scribbling my small thoughts, or not small if I could reach down to the core, the shame or anger that keeps me from throwing open the window of my life to breathe. The woman in the aisle is not thinking of how she appears, or if she is, a larger, freer part of her lifts high above, who do you think you are? Maybe it has taken her whole life to arrive here. If she had a tambourine, she would be shaking it. And when God opens the door of mercy on this day of awe, she is already halfway through. writers are just complete, I don't know, we're just completely suckers for anybody talking about, like, how do you write? What is writing? What's the method? How does that work? What's your process? So, and then I read somewhere, and this may not be true, but I read somewhere that Freud said, the artist dreams alone and in public. Excuse me, dreams aloud. The artist dreams aloud and in public. I don't know if that's true or not, but he did supposedly, well, I know that he wrote a lot about daydreaming and creative writing, and it makes sense. I mean, you're lying on your back free associating, give me a pen and let's see what happens. So he did a lot of that, but supposedly he also wrote about how to become a writer, and so that's what this is about. It's called Method. Write down every thought as it arises, develops, passes its baton to the next, without fabrication or hypocrisy, for 3 days, after which, Freud, quoting a minor German romantic, you will be a writer. Does the pencil change the mind's meandering, forcing focus, fabricating? Capture the calculus of association. Enter the art house or cineplex of thought. If auteur, then brooding. If big budget, then garish emotionality's grand explosions, bodies somersaulting through air. Be a flaneur, passing windows in winter trees. Include the hours when the inner talker is a bureaucrat at a metal desk, tallying the petty complaints of a day. Notice how often you repeat yourself. Believe you are finally admitting what's true. So I will read about 3 more poems. Poetry, art in general, and I think poetry in particular, it's a strange thing to do. And I think about this, that, I'm as riddled with shame as the next girl, but I really more and more feel that the act of writing, the act of making art, is a city of refuge. And it's the place that we can go, and we're not going to be punished or censored or shamed. Like, this place, the activity is just a place of permission. Be yourself. And then, when you then get a book, and then you stand before people. I mean, it's a complicated process, but I really do feel that, we all have that kind of somewhere that's a city of refuge. Like, this is the safe place where we get to be ourselves. So I'm going to embarrass myself by reading the next poem. But the poem, it starts with a dream, and then it sort of moves through the dream. And it's kind of a meta poem in that it's a poem about reading poems. Anyhow, it's called Telling. I peed in a chair last night, walked right by the restroom on my way to the podium. I'm going to read a selection from my recently published. Detoured into the kindergarten, stuffed myself into a wee chair, and wet. I like to be hit over the head by my dreamer, night poet, who encourages me to tell you about the time in the mountain diner I laughed so hard I burst, and left a pool under the table, which made us, old friends, an ex, laugh harder, and I sailed my soiled pants, like cotton, it was summer, out the window to dry as we drove. In my nice black skirt and boots, adjusting the mic, we are born not only naked but wet. Smattering of applause. And now you can go back to your own life, which is waiting, if you're lucky, to expose you, as mine does. Pant legs wide as wind sleeves in the August air. I'm going to read 2 more poems. I had a therapist once tell me that when your parents die, when the last of your parents die, nobody is standing between you and your own death. And so I experienced that to be true. Once you kind of pass that place and both of your parents have died, something shifted inside. So the poem is called The Feeling of Will Be Over. Finally, I believe I will die. The feeling arrives like the smell of eucalyptus, a medicine cabinet smell. Or is it more the sour of old ice from the encrusted freezer's snow cove back when bowls of hot water melted walls? or tar, or turpentine in coffee tins, after-school oil painting, little studio off Pico every Wednesday for years, the rag dipped, then rubbed on hands to remove cadmium or cobalt from the stand of trees I'd rendered valiantly, if naively, all afternoon. I am grateful for nothing, what I know of it, the studio long gone, my teacher dead, my mother as well, and the Pinto she picked me up in, famously recalled for bursting into flames on impact. And I will finish with the title poem, Left at the Ruin, which is, a poem with a happy ending. I spent a month in Greece, and then I was partly in a writing program, and then I had 2 weeks to myself on a small island. And, solitude is tricky. It can go all different ways, but this was like the best of solitude. I didn't need anybody else around me. When the sunrise came into my hotel room every morning and the Aegean, I was like, you get the idea. This is where I want to be. So the poem is called Left at the Ruin. Smashed apricots on the stone road, a few still on the branches. I am writing to remember how to get back to my hotel through the maze of streets. Walking slowly, stopping often to record in a little notebook another landmark. This coming to yourself, what is it? Poetry final, 2 hours, our teacher only half joking. 40 years ago, and I still don't know how to answer. Frying onion, aubergine, is scent a landmark? Is sound? The breakfast dishes and silver, a woman's voice, then a cry, child or cat, town of strays, sleeping in the shade. Pay attention is as close as I get. But how often must I pass before the mind claims what the eye must surely each time see? Pink elephant on the poster, martini in its trunk, then the ubiquitous cock and balls, purple on the passage wall. Thank you, young scrawler, your anxious expression of power for the marker. And thank you to the young woman in the dress shop, bored, waiting, it seems, for her life to begin. And to old women, bow-legged and black, the shuffle of their slippers on stone, these vertical streets. A final is never final. I am still afraid of myself, though less so. Now I have almost made it back, left at the ruin, its open wound of plaster and rust, then right at the hotel's old gate. Open, it seems as though it hasn't shut in years. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you so much for joining me. I hope we can all just continue what we were doing in the lovely courtyard and go from there. So, thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
For being here.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you, everyone,
it.
for round of applause one more time for Jacqueline Berger. Thank you all for being here. We have books right across the hall. A variety of authors in fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and of course Jacqueline. I'm sure she would be more than happy to sign books for you all. And if you are interested in becoming a member, there is perks on merch as well as discounted books and paid events. We have a variety of programming here in the space. So if you'd like to inquire about that, feel free to ask Genesis at the front desk. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Join us in the courtyard.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm gonna get my pen.